Good morning. Oh, great. Well, I'm going to start with an important question. So imagine you're having a cream tea. I'm not sure if there's one planned this year for CCC, but you have your scone, your sorry? Okay. Right. It's your scone, your clotted cream, your jam. You have it in front of you. What do you put on first? The clotted cream or the jam? Who would put the clotted cream on first? Who would put the jam on first? Oh, yeah. Right, well, we'll come back to that later. So our post-Easter theme is living as a resurrection community. What difference does it make, and what difference should it make? And this morning we'll look at what Paul says about Christ breaking down the walls of division, and what this might mean for us and for the church and the world. So let's have a look at the passage that was just read for us. Paul is writing to the church in Ephesus, and as we heard, he starts off by saying how we are saved. We're brought from death to life, and it's through the death and resurrection of Jesus. It's all about grace, God's love in action, what he has done, rather than what we've done. And for those who were here last week, we're talking quite a lot about grace and unconditional love. If you weren't here, it's on YouTube. You can listen to Dave talking about it. And Paul establishes the basis of the argument all about it is about this foundation of grace. And then comes on to one of the key words that he loves to include in his letters. Therefore, after establishing the foundation, he moves on to his main point. What are the implications of what he's just said? How are we going to work this out? And here it is that the Gentile and Jewish believers are being brought together into one church. And Jesus has brought peace through the two, and he's linking this in through the actions of what happened on the cross. Through the death and resurrection, Jesus is making them one. And it was a big issue in the first century as the church was being established. At first, it was just this small group of Jewish believers, and then widening out into some of the Jewish converts and going out into the rest of the land. And then it was starting to go further out across the known world. And Gentiles were starting to join the church, which was leading in all sorts of challenges, because there's all sorts of cultural differences and all sorts of historical differences. And how was that going to be all worked out? And Paul is explaining that Jesus is bringing peace in these situations and breaking down these walls. It was a radical idea, and it probably wouldn't have been something that some of the people would have expected at the time. Peace is flowing from the grace that's being talked about, and that they were all to be reconciled as a holy people, a people who are set apart for God, and to serving as a dwelling place of God in the world. But normally, the Jewish people would have been kind of looking down on the Gentiles. They weren't part of Abraham's children. They mostly didn't follow or understand the various traditions that were going on. They were different people. They didn't have that shared language, and the Gentiles didn't fully understand all the history and always fully the background of the Jewish people. Didn't understand. They thought it was a bit strange. They didn't have all these idols and things that most of the others. But they were being brought together now into one body, equal access to the Father and Holy Spirit, fellow citizens, members of his household. The law is being abolished in the sense that what was causing division about who was in, who was out, was being taken away, and that they were now a witness in the world of what could happen. What grace can mean if grace and God's love starts working in amongst them. And Paul is calling the church in Ephesus, and indirectly to us, to see the church, the body of believers, as being one. Even if there's different characteristics, cultures, languages, backgrounds, the dividing walls are coming down. The theme is a common one for Paul, and as I've been sort of reading through this again and again over the last couple of weeks, various other passages have also been coming. I can sort of hearing echoes of some of the other things that Paul's talking about, of wanting to get across about unity, things coming to mind, such as later on in Ephesus, talking about, Jesus being the head, bring everything into a body. There is one body, one spirit, one hope for your calling, one Lord, one faith. In Corinthians, when in the first chapter, he starts fairly early on referring to the quarrels that they were having, because some people are going, I follow Apollos, I follow Paul, I'm with Peter, and Paul's going, what's this all about? Christ wasn't divided. We're all one, trying to bring everybody back. And Colossians, where talk about the Christ being the head of the body and the fullness and everything coming together in him. There may be other ones that you can think of where Paul's talking about this sort of topic that he comes back to again and again. It was important. And to us today in the 21st century, it may seem slightly more academic. It might not be as relevant depending on our background circumstances. And thinking, is it just an interesting thing about two little groups and how they were brought together? But it's all part of a bigger thing that Paul says about unity. And if we think about it as also being insider versus outside, different attitudes to traditions, different cultures, different languages, different ways, they might seem a bit more relevant to today as well. Because it was something that was radical, bringing together these different groups together, and also male and female together, slave and master, across the whole known world. Everyone was a fellow citizen. And a sign to the world, death and resurrection of Jesus leads to something new. We have a message of grace for the world. It's not just meant to be a holy huddle. An alternative would be one of these sects of the time called, such as the Essenes, which are a Jewish sect that actually went out into kind of wilderness place and actually built physical walls just to kind of keep themselves separate, whereas God called his church to expand. And today, how does this affect us at CCC, the wider church, the world? Now, we have to accept there is always going to be differences. And there's also intentions of things and people gravitating towards people who are similar in different ways, shapes or forms, in different ways, such as geographically, whether small places or continents or nations. Here in the southwest, there is quite a dividing line between Cornwall and Devon, hence the question earlier on about the cream teas. Because it's very distinct ways, and as National Trust and other people find out, if you show a picture of the cream tea from the other county in the other place, heaven help you, you're going to get inundated with complaints. It's kind of the end of the world, as to this is a key matter. There's other dividing lines thinking locally with things like football, Exeter City and Plymouth Argyle. And some of these are fun, kind of, a friendly bit of rivalry and bit of banter, it can be quite fun. But others go beyond this and can be damaging. We gravitate to people like us, that's okay. Normal to be alongside like-minded people and feel at home there. But when does it become a wall, a barrier? Defines who's in, who's out. When do we see the wall first? And that affects how we view people. When do they create problems? When do we see that as creating suspicions? Is that group being treated differently to us? So it's natural to have differences. We're not kind of one identical mass. But as a church, how we think about these, are we any different to other people? We're called to a higher purpose as God's people. We're called to have confidence in what God has done, as opposed to what our group or our tribe has done. An example to the world that God's grace is wide and transcends whatever barriers we have and whatever barriers we try to create. Some people object to Christianity, religion, because they see numerous denominations, all these kind of divisions. Sometimes they've seen, or their impression is that churches and Christians are constantly fighting each other and more concerned with arguing sometimes insignificant points rather than loving people, rather than doing other things. I don't know whether you've had experience of hearing people say that. I've certainly have before when talking about that. And people come out with that as an objection, which there's times you think, well, that isn't too unusual, because we do gravitate to other people, and if you look outside, there's lots of organisations and societies and things. But it's how it's done, and also maybe people do see us in the church as having a higher calling, kind of a different standard, because there's something that they grasp about how it should be lived out, and seeing things that aren't quite as they should be. I mean, you just have to look on social media and Christians on there arguing seemingly insignificant points about something really minor. It depends whether you're in or whether you're out. Almost seeing if you don't quite agree with them as being the enemy, and getting quite irate. And some people, are holding on to our walls. And there's various times I see this. There's various things that came to mind as I was thinking about it in different ways. My dad's a Methodist local preacher, and many years ago he was invited to preach at a village in Yorkshire, a short distance from where he lived. Got asked quite a few times to do things like that, because in small rural circuits where there's lots of chapels and not many preachers, they need help. And in that particular one, there were two Methodist chapels. Look, typical non-conformist chapels like this. For the date when there was Wesleyan Methodists and Primitive Methodists before they rejoined. And they used to have one service in one, and then the next week they'd go to the other one and have the service there. And so my dad went, led the service, and then afterwards was chatting to the people, making conversation, possibly over a cup of tea, and was saying, so I gather for next week you're over the road, and and you keep travelling between the two. And there's a pause. Oh no, we that's the other church. We don't go there, and they don't come here. I mean, that morning there's only about 10 to 12 of them, and apparently there's only a similar number at the other one, so only about 20, 25 people between kind of these two chapels. One of the ironies is that it would have been almost identical service. It's not as if there would have been very different styles of worship, but they kind of couldn't cross the road to go to the other one. And a few years ago, when we were in that village, we saw that both had sadly closed down. One of them was the village museum now. And there's all sorts of stories that come to mind similar to that. We're holding desperately onto these walls. Although also needing to remember, as Jesus said about the planks in our own eyes, it's easy sometimes to see with other people. Oh, why are they doing that? And roll our eyes. And why are they kind of doing that? Why have they got those walls there? And sometimes overlooking our own. The ones that, we're so used to them, we don't actually see them. Or we have some natural excuse in our mind for why we might hold these walls together. They're so familiar that we don't see them. The tension of being diverse and united. I said there is a natural thing about finding sometimes gravitate people who are similar, things that we have shared in common, have different denominations and groupings, because we are all different and wired differently. If you like evensong, high church sacraments and liturgy, or long Quaker silences, it's probably highly likely that you would find a home elsewhere. But does that become a defining thing? Being diverse is a topic in itself, and for another day, and I gather James has spoken about it before. But do we see those differences as walls? Do we see that we're different of the things that we have built up as barriers or not? Do we see ourselves still as being part of the same household? Things that aren't always easy, thinking back to university days, and you're sharing halls of residence and houses with other people, and suddenly discovering that, some people have been brought up doing things different way and different ways of doing things, and have all sorts of differences and things that you think is fairly natural. But we're still living together. You can't just suddenly say we're going to pretend that we're not part of the same household. And here, whether we're here or in the wider church, we are one, and all equally have access to the Father through the Spirit, as Paul puts it. And if we look at the wider world, we see plenty of walls, don't we? Lots of walls get built up between all sorts of different groups. And I think the world is crying out for people to help break those down, help us to mix with one another, not so tribal, so we can talk and communicate with each other and can coexist. I think this is one of the things that maybe we're called to do, to model to the world how we can do it, if we can get it right. It's about saying how we can break these walls down. One area where there are very clear walls is in politics. And I saw a great video a few years ago by a group called Christians in Politics, which, as the name suggests, is an organisation supporting people active in politics who are Christians, and it's from across the political spectrum. And in the video, the leaders of the various political associations within the Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrats were chatting and saying, obviously there's lots of things they don't agree on, all sorts of policy things and how how societies run and things. However, they all have acknowledged the lordship of Christ, and so surely we can talk and we can discuss things, debate, get on, cooperate in many ways, even if we don't always agree. And what a gift this could be to their own parties and the world, to show this is how things can happen, how we see people, how we look at them. That the walls don't have to kind of hem us in, and we can disagree and discuss and talk with one another. And if there's a cup of tea and a piece of cake, so much the better. And the tagline in that, and the title of that video was "Disagree with Tea." Other beverages are probably available as well. However, also, before closing, I wanted to mention that one thing that's not necessarily called to do is keep quiet necessarily for the sake of things. It's not. There are maybe times when we have to wrestle with particular topics and issues. In the passage, it refers to circumcision, and there were genuine things that they had to work out in the church. We can read about it in Acts in some of the letters of some of the topics that, how are we going to work this out? How are we going to kind of grapple with those together? And there are kinds to do that. And they said that is a topic in itself, although, said again last week, briefly touched about sort of, being able to challenge people while still loving them. But it doesn't mean it's more like, but we can still cooperate, to talk to each other, even if, and look at these things without building up the walls. So in the light of Paul's challenge to the Ephesians, how do we view ourselves as a church, both here at CCC and wider? Are we members of one household? Is that how we view things? Are we able to recognise differences without building up walls? And are we able to model it to people outside us? As we consider this and trying to think, well, how are we going to kind of outwork this? We do need to remember that it isn't easy. As we go back to the passage, the reason that Paul is talking about it and has to mention things like that several times is that it isn't easy. It knows it's not easy, and people are having difficulties with it. So that, we need to recognise that. But we need to remember from this that we are one. It's through what God has done, through his grace, through that unconditional love that he has brought. He's already kind of gone ahead of us by offering the grace to help us, making us one through the death and resurrection. And also, of course, and we'll go back to see how many were paying attention from the start of the service, are we on our own? No. Yeah. James certainly doesn't think we are. Yeah. As we have with the Spirit, which Paul refers to, we all have the same access to the Father and Spirit. And alongside this, as we work it out. So if this makes a difference to us as a resurrection community, what can we achieve for God together? If we break down walls rather than build them up, what will people see? Can we bless those around us? And will this attract them to find out more about God and his grace? Amen. Right. So, Father, I pray that the whichever of these words are of you, that they would be in our hearts now. And Father, as we take these, that we would help us to see with your eyes, for barriers to disappear. And Lord, that we see first and foremost your grace, your unconditional love which you have for us and for others, and your great message that you have. That we can see that and that we can take it for ourselves and take this out as a message for those around us. Amen.